This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. And this is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. My guest today is Saradjen Bartley Pelissier. Her first book is A Plum's Tale, which follows the life of twin sisters Maë and Nayou. The girls usually enjoy eating their fruits. However, it is another story when it's time to eat their plums. Saradjen Bartley Pelissier is a children's book author. She was born in Haiti and later moved to Canada, where she lives now. Before she started writing books, she obtained a bachelor's degree at Concordia University. After wearing many hats as a professional, she later rekindled her true passion, writing. A Plum's Tale holds a special place in her heart, not just because it's her first book, but she was carrying her very first child as this baby was getting published. Aside from writing, she enjoys crocheting, painting, and playing with her dogs. Saradjen Bartley Pelissier joins me now here on Speaking of Writers. Welcome to this program.
Thank you. Thank you for receiving me.
So what is this book all about?
Well, this book, as you mentioned, it is a story of two twin sisters, Maë and Nayou. It talks about them not wanting to eat their plums. It is a story that is highly relatable. And at the end, with their mother, they just end up having a deal and they're like, okay, you know what? Here's what we're gonna do. Since you don't want to eat your plums, this is what we are going to do. So this story, as you mentioned, it holds a very important part in my heart. It is a book that I wanted to publish, especially using melanated characters, because there is a lack of representation in children's book. You know, we live in a world that is so diverse, but unfortunately in children's books, it is still something that that is still lacking. So I wanted a story that was relatable. I wanted a story that was easy to read, and a story with a little moral to it as well, in order to encourage children to read more, and on top of it, especially for minorities children, if by reading this book, okay, seeing characters that look like them, it is something that makes them feel valued, validated. So this is what I had in mind when I was writing A Plum's Tale.
So why plums and why twins?
Oh, well, I have a very good friend that is very dear to my heart, and she is in the book as well as Mommy Gigi. She has twins, Maë and Nayou, and this is them growing up. Now they're 6 years old, but them growing up, they didn't like plums. You would find plums everywhere, but not in their dish, not in front of them. They would not eat them. So they would come with very amazing ways of not eating the plums, very several reasons of not eating the plums. So I did get inspired by them.
And I mentioned in the introduction, this first book here, you were carrying your first child while you were
Yes.
writing this book. How did that inspire you?
Oh, well, I was really, I could say that with Isaiah, carrying him make me want to write this book more, made me want to publish it more, because you know I'm from Haiti and my husband as well is from Haiti. So we're having a little boy, um, and I felt like, you know, for example, me growing up, I used to read a lot, but I could not feel represented. I did not feel represented really in books, and I wanted it to be different for him. I wanted it to be differently for him. I wanted him to be able to, you know, to feel like, okay, yeah, these characters, they actually share my features. So it was, I couldn't, I can't really put a word to the feeling.
Mm.
It was really like a legacy, I would say. This is something that I was making sure that what I was lacking, I wanted it for my kid. Even if it was, you know, one book at a time. I want this fair representation in books. So this is what I had in mind. Like having him inside of me just made me want, want to publish the book even more. Like have a lot of books, a lot of stories that he could relate to.
So for a couple of firsts for you, first child and first book too. And what was the
Yes.
feeling like when the first book got published?
Oh, I'm not gonna lie, I was very anxious,
Mm,
very, very anxious because this is my first book. I studied in supply chain operation management. So this is not my field. This is not my area at all. And of course, I love kids. I've always loved kids. But having a first book published, it was, there's like a mix of feelings. Like having my newborn, I was so excited having a newborn and having this book that was coming, and I was reading it to him. It was in my belly. I was reading it to him. So when I had the first copy and I was reading it to him, seeing how he was reacting to the um to the images and everything, it was just an amazing feeling.
the illustrations in this book, did the publisher connect you with an illustrator, or did you meet the illustrator?
Oh, the illustrator is a very good friend of mine, very
Mm,
dear to my heart. Her name is Tamerly, but we call her Tau. So we worked so hard to make this happen. Like this book, sincerely, it required so many sacrifices. It was not easy because we started thinking about working on the illustration, but it was COVID. And
mm.
in Canada, it was not easy to see each other. And there were so many regulations. There were so many things that made it not easy to connect. But I was so happy that at the end she was able to express my idea, and she was able to make it happen. The journey itself was amazing.
And your journey has been very interesting. You have a business background. You touched on that a little bit. Did you always want to write?
Yes, yes. I've always wanted to write. I would tell stories. It was more about telling a lot of stories to the kids, to the children around me. I was the one always making fun stories with anything around us. It could be a piece of paper, it could be anything. I would just make that just take life. But I was always scared of writing a book because I was like, I don't know if I can do it. I'm not sure I can do it. But I ended up doing it.
Mm. You mentioned earlier you loved reading growing up. Who are some of the authors that inspired and books that inspired you?
Oh, there's this book that I truly love growing up. I read it a lot when I was, let's say, seven, six, no, six, five, six, seven. I read it a lot, and it's a book called Martin. In Haiti, anyway, this is a book that you could find everywhere. So you could
Mm,
see Martin goes to the beach, Martin goes to school. It is a book that is written by a Belgian author. However, I would see myself doing the adventures. I would see myself doing everything that Martin was doing. But again, she did not look like me. So it was hard to me. It was hard for me to relate to the character itself, but I would relate to what she was doing. And this is the feeling that, you know, if I can change it one book at a time, I want to do that. I'm willing to take the risk.
mm. A few points here that you wanted to talk about. Representation in media. Talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Well, representation in media. We are a diverse world, so of course in media, representation is diverse. However, there's still a lack of accurate representation in media. Okay. And I seriously thought of it several times. I asked myself, who would I be today if there were a lot of more, let's say, Black girls, if there were more Black girls in mainstream media when I was growing up? Who would I be today? Growing up, we know that the more children are exposed to diversity, the more that children see that something is possible in mainstream media, the more they excuse me, they can relate to the person or to the thing. So we know, especially for kids, the more they see it, the more they know that it can happen. So I know, and I would say that I believe that representation has a direct impact on how children see themselves in the future. So this is why, again, I wouldn't say I don't know if I'm advocating for it, but I want it to happen.
How about the importance of positive representation?
Yes, it is very important that there is more positive representation of minorities in mainstream media, because we do see minorities in mass media. It is, however, sometimes non-accurate, in a non-accurate way, and it is time that this truly changes, because when accurately represented, you feel relatable. It gives you a sense of comfort, of belongingness. Kids are the future. And the more the new generation is exposed to positive representation, the better the acceptance and inclusion of others.
This book, by the way, A Plum's Tale, is available at writersrepublic.com, also Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com as well. What about stereotypes?
Well, again, me being a minority, because again, I'm from Haiti, I was exposed to a lot of stereotypes in mass media, because it is the main source of information about everyone. So television, for example, well, when I was growing up, it overrepresented Latinos and Blacks as lawbreakers. And as a young Haitian growing up, it bothered me a lot. I just couldn't relate. I seriously would tell myself, okay, they lack imagination. It's not normal that this is the only stereotype that they have. This is the only way they're presenting minorities, these minorities. And it was essentially a shock to realize that this was also how I was perceived when I was traveling. So at some point, I do see, in a couple of years, I did realize there was a shift at some point in mass media. But there's still a lot of room for improvement. And I believe, for example, in gestures like including different characters, diversity in children's book, then more children again are exposed to diversity. And I think these are the children that will grow up and understand that, what, it is time to have fair representation, a more accurate way to present diversity in mass media.
And finally, what would you like kids to take away from this book?
From this book, this book has a little moral to it. So first of all, I wish that while reading these books, they feel validated, they feel seen, they feel heard. And on top of it, as I said, there's a little moral to the book, so that they know they can tell the truth, and mommy will always be there, to help them, to reward them, and of course, always tell the truth, because it is the way to go.
The book is A Plum's Tale. It is available at writersrepublic.com, also Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Saradjen Bartley Pelissier, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you again, Steve, for your time, and have a good day.
You too. And this is Speaking of Writers. This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards.